My name is Richard Everett Upton, and I wrote the book Figments and Fragments, which is a collection of 11 short stories. What they're about is life in general for a lot of people. And I am not a great novel writer. That would not be my milieu at all. But short stories I really have taken to. And in this collection are, I think, amusing ones and provocative ones and things that appeal to you generally. These are adventure stories in many, many ways. You have a young, gorgeous man who meets an elderly princess, and she wants to take him home to meet the family. And that works out very well for him in the end. Then there's a young girl who can't marry anyone except from that town she lives in according to her father's will. Then there's the young man who adores her. And they work that one out. So then there's a man who lives in a trestle bridge. It's about a man discovering who he is, basically. And he's a sailor, and this takes place in Key West. It's one of those stories that provokes you. It has a bit of philosophy in it. And you wonder who the man is, what the man is, and where he's going. He's a very rich man. He has a beautiful sailboat, and he has a beautiful home, several homes, but he's not quite satisfied with who he is or where he's going. There's a story in here about food. Two people meet, and both are in the phases of change in their lives. One of them is a very good cook, and the other one is a retiree, and they become fast friends. It's a story of friendship and food. Then there's a story about summer vacation in Maine, where a young boy remembers the times before World War II. Now, it's interesting because this has a bit of history in it. Then, oh dear, there's a young man who is very successful in his business, and he has always wanted to be something else. And in this case, he recognizes that very often we're given two talents, and we have to choose one to be satisfied with our lives. So he finds that out for himself. When I was a little boy, we lived in New York, and I was probably 7. And this period is through maybe 7 to 11. I had a fascination with ships because we lived very close to the docks of New York on the west side. And I had the extreme wonderful privilege of welcoming the Normandy, which was once the fastest ship in the world and one of the most beautiful ships that ever sailed the 7 seas, although she only crossed the Atlantic. And it was my adventure because my aunt was going to Europe on it, and she was a very grand lady. But my experience in ships in New York was that this was during the Depression, and I looked like a little boy in overalls who might be poor and hungry and all that. And the people on these liners would give me food to take home, you know, like from the Italian line, sausages and whatever they had. So I would go home, and my mother and father were absolutely baffled how I did all of this. But it seems as though I was a very popular little boy on several ships in New York. That story is called the ferry boat. In New York in those days, the ferry boat used to go across. I mean, lots of ferry boats went across. So you would change ferry boats and go all the way from where I lived, which was Christopher Street, up to 125th Street and back down. Now, that was quite an adventure for a little boy. You had to sneak in doing this, and that was the fun of it, just getting on the boats, because you had 1 nickel. I mean, that's what I had to spend, so 1 nickel had to do it all for me. Written word, to me, is probably the most important expression we can give. We speak, and what we've said is forgotten. But the written word has it all down in a way that you want to express yourself. This book is also illustrated, and each story has an illustration. Because when I go to buy a book, I look to see if they're illustration. And if they're not, I'm not that interested in the book. When Frank Burroughs, my illustrator, and I discussed this, he said, "Why do you want illustrations?" I said, "Because I like illustration." So he's done a very fine job of illustrations. I mean, for instance, he created that cover, and he created everything in it. What happened was I was having dinner with a friend of mine to whom I had given the manuscript, and it was a rainy night. No, we didn't go out anywhere, and he said, well, read some of your stories to me. And I said, okay. So I sat down and I read them, and he said, you have to be published. And I said, that's nice. And so what happened was he decided that we were going to publish this book. And that's how it got published. It was out of the generosity of my friend Frank. And we pulled it off.